There. So hi, thank you. Hello, I am Naomi Miller, and I am jumping the gun a little bit. My Bachelor of Applied Science in Human Nutrition with an emphasis on dietetics won't be conferred for another 2.5 weeks. But I have been an Anglican priest for 25 years, and I have been a nutritionist since the day that I claimed that title in my bio for this event. Nutritionist is not a protected title in either Ontario or Manitoba, so I can claim it. But if you are joining from Alberta, Quebec, or Nova Scotia, I am not a registered member of any regulatory body. But I am a person with a fair amount of education and many opinions about what it means to eat well and to feed one another well. So I come to this as a preacher and a pastor and someone who talks a lot about God. And if we understand our scriptures as a significant source of information about who God is and who we are and how the world works, then our scriptures are full of stories in which eating and feeding are absolutely integral to the story. And over time, it seemed clear to me that I couldn't actually talk about God without talking about eating and feeding, about eating well and feeding each other well. And nutrition isn't just about whether or not we're getting too much or not enough of a particular nutrient. It's also about how we eat and when we eat and what systems we have in place in order to share our abundant food resources with equity and with justice. It's about how the act of eating and feeding contributes to our wellness and our wholeness, physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually. But you know these stories, right? So what jumps out to you as stories where eating or feeding are at the core of what God is doing in the world? So there's lots of those stories. And eating is so much a part of who we are as humans, literally from the beginning, where the first thing a newborn knows how to do is suck. We are formed and shaped as people by the ways our families eat, by the ideas about food that we learn as we are learning how to eat. I grew up expected to clean my plate. Dessert was a reward for eating my vegetables. Uh, I have this distinct childhood memory from a family party that even though there was only one thing on the buffet table that was even remotely appealing to me, I wasn't allowed to eat more than one because I needed to leave enough of them for all of the adult cousins who were more important than me. I had to figure out where I fit into the social system of the high school cafeteria. I spontaneously proposed to my husband over a particularly perfect roast beef dinner that he had prepared for us. I learned when my kids were little about division of responsibility. And from their very first experiences at our family table, I trusted them to know themselves, to know what they wanted and how hungry they were. And that was how I learned to parent them, trusting them to know who they are and what they need and what they want. And now I have these two adult children who confidently tell me who they are and what they need, and who trust me to believe them and to do what I can to meet those needs. And all of this to me is God stuff. Who am I? Can I be loved? Who is my neighbor? Whose tables do I sit at and who sits there with me? How do I love the people that I love? And for me, all of these things come together in the Eucharist. This act of feeding and eating is sacrament. It is a physical thing that we do that has a real spiritual impact. And it is, I would propose, close to the heart of how we live into God's mission and purpose in the world. And every one of us is going to have different passages of scripture, different elements of tradition, different experiences that form our understanding of who God is and what God is doing in the world, and how we are gifted and called to participate in that. But Marcy, let me have the microphone today, so I get to tell you mine. I have John 10:10 tattooed on my arm. I see this as Jesus giving us his own mission statement. Why am I here? What am I doing? I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And I believe that there's something important about actually telling other people about this, that our work in the world as followers of Jesus is to be attentive to and to participate in divine self-revelation. The abundant life that Jesus came for isn't just to be seized or enjoyed or pursued or hoarded. It is to be shared. And then in the Great Commandment, the thing that Jesus told us to do is love one another. And not for nothing, but he did tell us to do that in the context of a shared meal. And then we have to figure out what we mean by love. And it's not the easiest idea to define. My shorthand definition of love is about meeting people's real needs. That love pays attention to what the beloved needs, and love works to provide it, even when meeting that need is inconvenient or when it requires personal sacrifice. So our participation in God's mission in the world is, to me, all about both showing and telling the world that all people are created in the image of God and are beloved of God, and that God desires abundant life for all of us. Does anybody recognize this text? I can see Marcy nodding. I can't see a lot of other frames. So this comes from my Anglican tradition. It is a part of the examination before we get to the watery bit of a baptismal ceremony. We openly declare that this is what you are getting yourself into, or that this is what you are getting your infant child into. That there are forces that oppose God's mission in the world, and we renounce them. And Jesus names that spiritual force, that evil and corrupting power, the source of that opposition, as a liar. And I would propose that there is one central lie and a whole range of ways that this one central lie manifests itself in the world. Ways that one class or category of people gets treated as worthy and whose abundant life is sustained at the cost of those who are unworthy. What are some of the variations on this lie that we get told about who is worthy of abundant life and who is unworthy and denied abundant life? One manifestation of that lie is diet culture, which is also really hard to define. But like all the other lies, it's a moral hierarchy with thin bodies as valuable and fat bodies as bad, inherently faulty, and often dehumanized. It leads to an assumption that anyone who doesn't have a thin body should not only want a thin body, but should be willing to do whatever it takes to have a thin body. And if any physical or mental or spiritual or social harm is caused by that effort, it's not only justified, it is expected, it is required if it leads to weight loss. And it manifests in the use of moral language to talk about foods and eating. This cake is bad. I'm being good because I had a salad. And there are moral conversations to be had about food and the equity and justice of how it is produced and distributed. But the diet culture judgments are not that. It's more like expensive, fresh, organic, and inaccessible is good or clean or guilt-free, and affordable or delicious or convenient is bad. I would never feed that to my children. Even though sometimes the difference in the actual nutrient content of those two things can be negligible. And all of this becomes systemic and structural and self-perpetuating, because all the people who teach us how to eat and how to value ourselves are themselves steeped in this moral hierarchy about what is and isn't a good body, and myths about what are good and bad ways to eat and to feed one another. And I'm confident that every one of us here in this conversation is working to resist that central lie in one way or another, in multiple ways. And thank you for that. Because the good news is that no matter how you are working to resist that lie, it's all the same lie and it's all the same resistance. And we can celebrate and strengthen and teach and learn from one another. And we often talk about that in nutrition-related metaphors. We can feed one another and bring each other to the table and break bread together. I'll drink to all of that. But the particular way that I feel called and moved to resist the lie is by bringing together what I know through scripture, tradition, reason, and experience to be true about us as image bearers and beloved children of God, and what research and empirical evidence tells us to be true about the most life-giving ways for us to nourish ourselves and one another. And there are choices to be made that impact our wellness for better or for worse. And a lot of it boils down to this, that caring for ourselves and for each other is complicated, and it takes resources and time and planning and knowledge and effort. And all people created in the image of God are worth that effort. The people you love, the people you feed are worth the effort. Strangers, vulnerable people are worth the effort. You are worth the effort. So then what are some of the ways that we can resist the lie when it comes to how we nourish ourselves and each other? I'm still working on all of that, but here's maybe a start. One is fight for food security. Seriously, fight to make sure that all people have access to safe, sufficient, and culturally appropriate food. We know that poor nutrition leads to all kinds of negative health outcomes and problems with children's growth and development. And the biggest contributor to poor nutrition is socioeconomic status. So however you can and do contribute to our being a society that feeds its vulnerable people, do that. We live within a culture that makes pervasive assumptions about thinner being better. I would invite you to listen and watch for it. How casually we say, like, have you lost weight? Congratulations, you look great. That happened all the time while my mother was dying of an undiagnosed endocrine disorder. For starters, just don't participate in that. Resist the urge to make small talk about people's bodies. And at the more advanced level, we can disrupt that cultural script as a bystander just by naming it. And if you're feeling really confident, it can be a lot of fun to return the discomfort about that to where it belongs, which is to the people who persist in making small talk about other people's bodies. You can start with yourself. Figure out what your body needs and give it food and movement and rest. And do that in joyful ways. One of the things that diet culture does is tell us that food is supposed to be utilitarian. And if you are eating for joy or delight, then you are eating something that you shouldn't, something bad. And that for movement to count, to lead to weight loss and therefore be good and purposeful, it has to be a workout. But movement can be joyful and playful. Movement is not penance that we have to pay for the sin of enjoying a cookie, right? You hear the religious language there, right? And then there's a whole thing about rest that is not my area of emphasis, but it is adjacent. And that is rest. Resist the urge to be constantly productive. Let God be in charge of the world while you take a nap. Give your body what it needs. And as you learn to trust yourself about what you need, trust other people to know what they need. Choose not to contribute to the background chatter that tries to control what other people are doing to nourish themselves. And again, this is a great place for a bystander to disrupt the standard cultural scripts. to trust that people are making the best choices for themselves within the resources available to them and the limits and restrictions and needs and hungers that other people may not know anything about. And finally, I would suggest that we be attentive to how we speak about food and think about food, not only, but especially around children and teens and people who are learning from us about what is good, about their worthiness, about how to take care of their own beautiful, image-bearing, dust-formed, spirit-breathed bodies. Because eating for abundant life means a variety of different foods that meet a variety of different needs. And kale is full of nutrients that our bodies need, and milk helps my bones grow strong, and gluten-free bread means I can share my lunch with my friend Lauren, and chocolate chip cookies make me feel close to my grandmother who taught me how to bake. And candy is delicious, and a blast of sugar is sometimes just what my brain needed. And all of those things in balance nourish us and can and should be enjoyable. So that is the Coles Notes version of what pastoral nutrition might be. I made up the title, so be whatever we say. But I'd love to get a wider and broader perspective on this. So I wonder if you might talk in your small groups about where our ceremonial and symbolic eating and feeding and our daily and concrete eating and feeding intersect. Coming at that intersection from either direction. So in your experience, what has been important about the way your church celebrates the Eucharist? What has that taught you about eating and feeding well? Or what has been important about the ways that your family or community celebrates a feast? And what has that taught you about who you are and your place in the world?
Thank you, Naomi, for coming and sharing your joy and passion about this and your evolving understanding of this. And thank you, all of you, for coming and participating today.